trail and ultra runners, what is going on? Welcome to another episode of the Koopcast. As always, I'm your host, Coach Jason Koop. I hope everybody is well today. This episode of the podcast is a personal one for me. On the podcast today, I have someone who has had a tremendous impact on me, both personally and professionally, and that is JT Kearney. JT has spent his entire life working in the areas of physiology, athlete performance, and leadership. And I got to know JT after he had spent 24 years as a physiologist at the U.S. Olympic Training Center in Colorado Springs, Colorado, where he directed the best athletes and the best coaches in the entire world to Olympic success. He was a personal mentor of mine and one of my direct supervisors when I was a young coach in my mid-20s, and I'm proud to still call him a mentor as well as a friend. During our time that we worked together, JT taught me how to be a better leader. He taught me how to find answers for myself, how to listen, and he called me out whenever I got it wrong, which, trust me, I did plenty of times. And that cycle never stops, because even in this very podcast, JT continues to bust my balls and put me through the ringer of humility, and I'm grateful for every single second of it. Every coach and every athlete deserves a mentor and a friend like JT. His counsel to me has been incomparable, and although it seems like a trip down memory lane at points during this podcast, I hope that some of the nuggets of wisdom that we uncovered during this discussion you can take with you, regardless of if you're an athlete, a coach, a husband, a wife, a leader in business, or a leader of people. JT, I appreciate everything that you have selflessly given to me over the course of my career. All right, enough of the nostalgia. Let's get right into it. Here's my conversation with JT Kearney. I wanted to start out by telling you this story that has lived far beyond the time frame that you and I worked together, and will probably, as long as I'm a coach and as long as I'm supervising and managing people, I think that this story will continue to live because it's meant so much to me.
I have a little trepidation here.
That's fine. You shouldn't, because it's been a positive impact, total positive impact. But I want to get your kind of impression on this interaction that we had several years ago, and then use that to launch this discussion. When I was a really young developing coach, probably in my mid or maybe even late 20s, and you and I had first started working together, I was gearing up for this biomechanics presentation that I was going to deliver across the entire coaching department, including you. And it was one of those things that for whatever reason, I just sunk everything into. Like I did a lot of research behind it. I spent, hours and hours of meticulous preparation, getting this whole thing ready. And I did the presentation, gave it to, and I thought I knocked it out of the park and, all this other stuff that, cocky 25-year-olds actually have. And I wanted to get your feedback on it. So I was like, okay, hey, can we set some time aside and you can tell me what you thought of this, honestly. And so we did like we had done countless times before. We walked over to Starbucks and you got your, pumpkin scone and pumpkin spice latte or whatever. And you took me through the whole thing. Okay, Koop, here's what you did good. Here's, where you could rearrange some things, and just this normal, it was all kind of relatively normal feedback, both technical stuff and delivery types of things. But at the very end,
where are you going with this?
You'll see. At the very end, you made this one statement, and this is the statement that kind of lives in perpetuity. You said, listen, if you ever confuse the terms exercise efficiency and running economy again, I'm not going to let you back in the building. I'm going to say, go home, don't pass go. You cannot make that mistake because you can fool the lay audience and people that you write for an article. But people like me and people like your peers, they will see through that and look at you as incompetent because of it. That has stuck with me, JT, for 20 years now, almost 20 years. And I tell that story to all of our incoming coaches in various flavors, depending upon, how I want to manipulate the situation. but it's kind of made an impact on me in two ways. And this is what I want to start talking about. The first one is the obvious way. It's like, listen, you got to know your shit. Like that is unquestionable that you have to know what you're talking about, because people will see through it. There's too much information out there. There's too many good people. You absolutely have to know your stuff. And yeah, it's just a silly little vocabulary switch, but it's meaningful in high performance types of contexts. That was the first thing. The second thing is, and I didn't realize this until like 5 or 7 years later, is that singular moment impacted me and also impacted others for years. And so finally, the way that I took it, I was like, you know what? If I were actually able to orchestrate some point of influence like JT had on me at that one particular moment in time, that can have an impact on others. That can have an impact on others. It can have an impact on others. It was a good leadership point. And that's kind of what I want to start out with. I don't know if you ever intended that interaction to be that way, but it was.
Well, I'll start from the end and go from there. I am not a very subtle person in the way I deal with people, the way I exercise, the way I compete physically. Subtlety is not me. When I was racing at the highest level in canoe kayak, the nickname the team gave me was Mr. Mello, which was obviously, okay, what is as far away as we can get to what this guy is actually like.
It's like calling the fat guy tiny.
What?
It's like calling the fat guy tiny.
Yeah, like calling the fat guy tiny. Exactly, kind of a situation. So I would not have set that up as in some way attempting to create, some sort of a impact moment. It's something that I believed, something that was always committed to in my communication with athletes and coaches, to try and be, one, as precise as I could, but be as accurate, especially when it came to implications for performance. I spent a lot of years and hundreds of presentations at the USOC working with coaches who had resumes of producing multiple Olympic champions over years and years and years. And so if I was talking to them about something that I believe from a sports science standpoint could have an impact on their performance, economy versus efficiency, I wanted to express that as accurately as possible.
Why do you think, and this is probably me, selfishly wanting to like lie down on the psychology couch a little bit. Why?
Just as long as you're not sitting in the chair.
Yeah.
If you're the client, that's all right. Yeah. I'm not lying down if you're going to be the.
No, we wouldn't want that either. But so I've respected you for a long time for the ability to be able to blend all of these different worlds, from sports science and coaching and mentorship and leadership. Why do you think that one piece, now having me, told you how much of an impact that it had on me, why do you think that had an impact on me? And like, what's the relatable piece to other people that are trying to have a mentorship or a leadership impact on people?
Mentorship is a very difficult term. And Koop, I honestly do not believe that you can aspire to be a mentor. Because if you're aspiring to be something that you're not, that you do not genuinely possess those characteristics that can have a positive impact on the way other people make decisions, and you're trying to in some way, inflate your own significance, your own presence or whatever, then you're never going to be a good mentor. I think I've had the incredible fortune to have had a series of mentors through my early professional life that established models for me. And I would be almost certain that none of them would have ever said, I'm trying to be a mentor to this guy. And it has to be genuine. Go ahead.
Yeah, but in a lot of cases, because there's a lot of athletes, and there's also a lot of coaches that'll listen to this podcast. A lot of coaches end up in that situation, in this kind of like mentorship role with their athletes or even with their peers as a byproduct of their vocation. And so while they might not desire to do it, or they might have the knack to do it, or they might not have like the own internal, personality or skill set or tools or whatever to do it, they're still in that position to a certain extent, and they still have to play a little bit of that role within their professional and personal lives. And I've always kind of wondered, and this is getting to your point, like what facilitates people that are extremely effective at doing that, which I always thought that you were with myself and with our coaching group, versus ones that just for whatever reason they can't like kind of grasp it.
Koop, I would say it's one to the quality of communication that you have with someone, and your ability to convey to them a message, whether that happens to be a knowledge-based message or I'll say more of a lifestyle-based message, how do we go about doing things, that quality of communication is incredibly important. And I think the way an individual demonstrates that leadership to a person is if I'm sitting down and talking to you at Starbucks about how your presentation on biomechanics was, other than drinking my latte, I'm trying to be just with you. I've thought through what you did in the presentation. I almost certainly have taken some notes on it. And I'm genuinely looking at it from a standpoint of, all right, if Jason is going to go out and do this again next week, how can he use what I'm telling him to perform at a higher level? And it's the same way coaches should understand this paradigm incredibly well. When they sit down and write out a month's training program, their objective is to be able to alter the overall performance capacity of an individual from where it was on September 1 to where it's going to be at the end of the month. I mean, that's the design. That's what they have in their mind. A story aside, one of the most prolific coaches that I had in one sport, and I say had sort of as a client, we got to the point where he would write down his objectives for the blocks of training. Usually he used 3 weeks. Sometimes they'd be a little bit longer, a little bit shorter. He'd write down the objectives. Then he'd give me all of the workouts, intensity, duration, stress, the whole thing. And then I'd go through and basically do a content analysis on those training programs. Are you actually stimulating at an appropriate frequency and intensity and training load to cause the adaptive responses that you've identified up above? And it was a wonderful interaction because it provided a feedback loop that allowed him to sometimes, and there were times when I'd have to say, you're going to kill him. You can't do this much all loaded on one variable. But there were other times when in, a month of training, 50 workouts, he'd have 6 workouts that were focused on his number one objective. Right. Come on. We've got to do better than that.
That style of schedule review is one of the things that we commonly use in our coaching group to like audit each other. So the stereotypical thing that we'll do to help provide counsel from coach to coach to coach, or if a coach has an athlete that they need some advice on, is we'll put their training up on a screen. We'll all get in a room. We'll put their training up on a screen, and the coach will kind of go over, this is what I want to do with this athlete. Physiologically, I want to work on these things, and here's what I'm actually doing. And almost always when the coach can't figure it out, those two things are in conflict. They're in mismatch. When everything's going great, you're doing exactly what you said you were going to do.
Yep. I agree with that. But going back to the leadership situation, Koop, I think leadership is such a difficult term to really define, and how you get into that situation, I'm not really sure. But I think the most important thing is the integrity, the ethical characteristics, the truth, that if I say I'm going to do something, I do it. If I don't go around and telling you one thing and go down the hall and tell somebody else something else. And because and I think those are always important, and it's almost like you can't use incorrect terms when you're presenting to highly professional people, because they're going to figure it out. Well, guess what? They're going to also figure out all of the ancillary traits that you have. And if those are ragged, AMF.
Well, and I've so since then, here's another corollary to that story, JT. Whenever I read a lay article, which I don't do a lot, but I still do. Whenever I read a lay article and those two words are flip-flop, I'm automatically, this person doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about. Automatically. Even though they might have just made a simple mistake or an editor changed it or whatever, which happens, I automatically go to the point where you just made, where if I'm just seeing this much of what's gone awry, there's probably 1,000 more things kind of like behind the curtain that we're not seeing.
Yeah.
You mentioned this really interesting point that leadership is this really tough thing to actually define and put a pin on, yet we know it when we see it. And you've always used this.
Absolutely.
You've used this story with the Beijing Olympics, which you were a part of, as kind of like a demonstration point of what good leadership is and what the result of it could actually be. Do you want to recap that a little bit? Because I think that's just like a fascinating, not many people understand what goes on behind the scenes to pull an Olympic Games off from the perspective of getting the athletes there and getting them prepared. So why don't you go through that?
I absolutely would love to. And as you know, I've recommended that you get one of the principles in my conversation about leadership in Beijing on one of your podcasts. And he's an incredibly modest guy. You're going to have a terrible time getting any eyes out of him. But I'll do the eyes for him, and then he can do the whatever.
Okay, perfect.
But Doug Ingram, who was director of sport at the USOC, got the assignment, okay? We know that the Chinese are going to attempt to make it as difficult as possible for the American team to be successful. And we worked through, and at his level, that was worked through very extensively of what was needed to prepare. From that overall pie, Doug got athletic preparation. What do we do with the athletes on the ground for their training, recovery, sports medicine, all of that end of the continuum? And how do I ensure that that's as effective as possible? So I think the genius that Doug had with that is that at his level within the organization, he got the assurance, all right, you have a team of, I can't remember, but I'll say 20 people. It might have been a little bit more than that, 25 people. And he said, okay, but I want to hand pick those 25 people based on my knowledge of their ability to be team players and contribute to the overall mission. So once he had his team, there were people that were really disappointed. They were sure they were in line to go to the Beijing games because they had checked various boxes and hadn't been to the last games or whatever. And he just didn't take them. But once he had his team, then he was absolutely straightforward in his communication. Our goal is to do this, to provide the Olympic coaches and the Olympic athletes with the highest quality of a training environment that we possibly can provide. And that included starting off with leasing half of a major university campus and all of its athletic facilities, accelerating the construction of a swimming pool that was a hole in the ground when we first started looking at it, to doing all sorts of stuff, on the ground with the staff. And Doug had the overall situation, but then he put individuals responsible for the various teams that took care of the functions within that. And every day we started off with an overall session. He talked about whatever was flowing down from him. And this started even before we got to Beijing. And we batted back and forth. What do we need? How do we need to do it? And then when we got on the ground, all hell broke loose. I mean, stuff like the Chinese had specifically dumped broken glass into the sand in the long jump, triple jump pits.
And so let's back up a little bit, because I want to accurately portray the enormity of the task at hand.
Oh.
You were trying to recreate training venues for every single Olympic sport except for one, if I remember correctly. Is that
three, I think.
Three. Okay, three. So every single Olympic sport that you can think of for the summer Beijing Olympics, yep. You were trying to recreate training venues at some random university that you had leased that when you get there is going to know like God knows what.
Yep.
And so there's certain parts of this where you're taking equipment and you're shipping it on boats over to China. You don't know if they're going to get there or not. You get there and there's intentional sabotage that the Chinese have done to this venue that they know that the Americans are taking over. Like how big of a project was it when you actually get there? You paint this one thing, it's like, oh, well, they put glass in the pits. I mean, it's like, it goes beyond that though.
Oh, it just, women's soccer, U.S. is fairly good at women's soccer.
Yeah.
In case and the Chinese had noticed that, by the way. So on the practice field, they had a set of American football goals exactly on the end line. So it would be incredibly dangerous if any of the women happened to run past the end of the field. And think of how many times people are going hell-bent for election and run way out of bounds. Just stuff, like that. We took, I believe it's correct, we took 9 sea containers, absolutely full of athletic equipment. We took, 10 sets of Olympic weights. We took weight platforms. We took racks. We took bicycle ergometers. We took all you need for a fencing venue, all the platform, multiple that. We took all the stuff that we needed for table tennis. We took multiple sets of hurdles. We took all the pole vault equipment. We took safety cages for the disc and the hammer throw. We, on and on and on. Well, one example, the Chinese heard that the U.S. was going to have a practice game in water polo, the women, against, I'll say, the Netherlands. You can't count me on that. Yeah. Some other team. I think it was the Netherlands. So the night before, they went to that pool, which was not in our venues that we controlled, and took out all the water polo goals and equipment.
This whole thing, like every time I talk to you about it, it gets more and more hilarious. But the thing that sticks in my mind is it's a small staff that did all of this. I mean, you look at any other reasonable like construction project or whatever. I mean, they'll have hundreds and hundreds of people trying to assemble what you guys assembled with 25 people in the matter of just several days or a couple of weeks, right?
Yeah, we were there about 2 weeks before the athletes got there.
So,
in that particular case, we had extra water polo equipment, and an hour later had it in the facility, all set to go. And we always had these minders, the Chinese staff that were supposed to help us. And some of the women, one of whom nicknamed them as just in general, Mr. Pima. And the Chinese don't know the acronym for pain in my ass. And so this was perfect. And so we addressed them as Mr. Pima. And, there was Mr. Pima from the basketball venue and Mr. Pima from this and that and so on. And they were all perfectly happy to be part of the Pima group.
Oh, my God. That's so hilarious.
Okay. And we just got around everything. Like, some of the crazy, crazy things. I'm not sure you've ever seen me try to play basketball, but I'm not a basketball guy. We had specifically paid for a gym that had a court that could be just used for men and women's basketball, and then the main gymnasium that we were going to use for volleyball and several other things. We get in there, and the guys that know basketball start looking around in horror. The backboards are basically the flush-mounted blackboards on the walls. So, and the American basketball team, either men's or women, they're really good. And sometimes some of those guys, after they make a shot, they run underneath the basket by 6 or 8 feet, if you would. Okay, so that's it. And then strategically, the lighting was set up so that if you were, say, 15 feet from the basket and you look at it, you're looking at the bank of mercury vapor lights that go all the way around the building, right smack in your eyes. Then their coup d'etat was, this is a suspended wood floor, like it was supposed to be. They take a basketball and they go around, and the ball is going boom, 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 and would just almost not come back up. The floor had dead spots all over it.
And this is what our Olympic basketball teams were supposed to be practicing on before the Beijing Olympics.
And speaking of leadership, Coach K came in. They took him upstairs, showed him the gym, talked about all the things that we knew were a problem, talked to him about the spots, and said, you can use this, but we believe you'll be a lot happier with this situation, and told him how we'd have to mix the schedule of the 4 major teams that needed the gym. He looked around and he says, "You're right. We'll make it work."
Yeah.
You know,
and that's what I want to get to the heart of the matter, because it's the "we'll make it work" piece. So to like broadly paint this picture, even if the Chinese weren't messing with you, what you were asked to do is an insurmountable task. You're recreating all of these different venues with 25 people over the course of a couple of weeks in a foreign country. But then you add the layer of you're actually getting government, like actual literal government interference in real ways. There's glass in the long jump pit. The facilities are inadequate. You have spies kind of embedded into the teams and things like that.
Oh.
But yet, like if you were to draw that on paper, I'd be like, oh, these guys are screwed. Like they're like the medal count's going to be terrible, blah, 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 blah. Like if you were just to paint that out, but yet you're able to pull it off. So what were the key pieces of leadership that you guys were able to use with the entire team that enabled you to actually pull this insurmountable task off?
I think it all goes back to my initial comment. Doug had the capability of putting in place, in front of all of the people that he hand selected, the vision of this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to support these clients. And it's important to remember that everybody on that team has been intimately involved with seeing those same clients. I mean, they understand and know what the client requirements are, which is incredibly important. I mean, if you're trying to put it together, you've got to know what you're trying to accomplish. You can't just decide we're going to provide this and they're going to figure out how to use it. That didn't happen at all. And so some of the most important interfaces were the coaches or technical directors for sports that we could communicate with beforehand. What do you need? How do you want it? So that we had that kind of information, and then we're able to implement it. So I think that's the first level, Doug's ability to communicate it to the group. The second level is he selected a group of us and assigned us various tasks within it. And then each of us took our little team and followed the same model. This is what we were going to do. And then people had, I think Doug's inspiration was such that everybody was 100% committed. It didn't make any difference what we were doing. Like to get the glass out of the jump pits, Wes Barnett, who you know, and I went out shopping with one of our liaisons and bought screen and 2x4, 2 different meshes of screen, and we built a sloped screening platform where the good sand came out the bottom and the rocks and the glass went down to the end. And we had crews of 3, 4, 5 people, all the women, girls, whatever, they're right in there with shovels, and we strained that whole thing. And the fun thing was we bought a couple of wheelbarrows, and every time we finished filtering it out, we took it across the field and dumped it in the Chinese pit.
I love it. I also
so I think it's inspiration. It's knowing what you're trying to accomplish.
Well, and I translate this down to coaches working with athletes, and they have to be invested in what the athlete is doing. You guys as a team, the 25 into 20 some odd individuals that you had going over there, one of the salient points of success that you had mentioned is that you had seen all of the clients or the athletes and their coaches and things like that for years in this lead up to Beijing. And there was an intimate connection between the staff and the athletes and what they were trying to accomplish. And that connection was part of this fuel that, allows you to run through brick walls and take glass out of, long jump pits.
Yeah. Yeah. I did just, it was a very, very impressive group of people to be part of. And, I'm a big one on this. I don't know of a conversation of anyone that was on that team that came back from Beijing and said, Koop, you wouldn't believe what I did. I was able to do this. I don't know of a single person that ever said that, because that just wasn't the way we were doing it.
Well, and what's really impressive about that is that's not what a lot of you all were signing up for. I mean, you're talking about high level sports physiologists, high level, athletic trainers, high level people in all these sports that are, this is going to sound a little bit derogatory, but I think it's going to make my point, that are reduced to digging the sand out of a long jump pit, as opposed to pricking people's fingers and finding out their lactate levels and hooking them up to gas analyzers and things like that. I mean, it's so far removed from what you were doing when they were back here in the States.
Oh, that's absolutely true. I mean, but there was no one that was saying, well, I'm an ankle taping specialist. I don't dig sand, or, I don't figure out how to move goalposts that are in the way for the women's soccer venue. That just did not happen.
So for the athletes and the coaches that are kind of out there, and they have to be part of a group of a team, either it's a coach leading a team of people or a group of athletes that have, some sort of leadership structure within their athletic organizational chart. What would you impart on them in terms of the things that you learned from that, to where they can take into their own organization and just make it function a lot better and do those things that are the duties as otherwise specified in order to pull the project off or whatever they're trying to do?
I know it sounds trite. It sounds incredibly trite, but I think to be successful in a situation as a coach, as a leader, you have to spend time sitting down, thinking about, really contemplating what you're trying to accomplish. What is your goal? And then once you have identified that, then it's much easier to decide, what are the behaviors that are appropriate to assist you in being able to achieve that objective. And coaching athletes is an incredibly, incredibly difficult situation, because many, many individuals who have aspirations for athletic performance that far exceed their genetic gifts to be successful at that. So let's say you're a high school coach and you're coaching milers, all right? Well, every couple of years, you're going to have some ninth graders show up, 1, 2, 3, who are capable of running a 5-minute mile when they show up. All right? And if you do a really good job with coaching them, they might be able to run a 4:40 or a 4:30. But if for 1 second you decide, okay, this 5-minute freshman miler, I'm going to have him running Jim Ryan times by the time he's a senior and be down in the 350s. That's just a totally inappropriate approach to achieving athletic success. I mean, so much of athletics, I would argue that 90% of the coaches that listen to your podcast are individuals who are trying to assist athletes to achieve the best that they can achieve, not being able to achieve some performance that is sterling by internationally competitive standards. Let's take, 100-mile runners. I mean, to run 100 miles is a hell of an accomplishment, but then, you have some genetic freaks like Matt Carpenter that we both know the name of. Most of your coaches have to, that in this process of deciding where they're going, what their objective is, and how they're working with an athlete, they have to recognize, okay, I'm going to try and help this young guy, Jason Koop, break the time standard of 24 hours for the Leadville 100, not to try and do it in 16 hours, and that will fulfill your objective, you as an athlete's objective.
Yeah, 100%. There's always going to be different flavors and kind of like levels of athletes, and the number of coaches that get to work with the top 1% or the top 0.5% are very few and far between. We probably mentioned like 5 of them since we started talking right now. 5 out of the 10 of them since we started talking right now. But so the vast majority are working with just normal people. But still, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like, still, the coach has to have certain leadership qualities in order for the coaching that they're delivering to be efficacious. It's not just the training program. It's the whole thing that gets wrapped around coaching. Oh. So what are the specific things with a coach, within the coach-athlete relationship, that are important?
Oh, I could not agree more on that. Well, we started off on feedback, and we're going to come back to feedback right now. The quality of communication of feedback to an athlete, in other words, how they're doing, how that training performance relates to a potential competitive performance. What's the relationship between training and ability competitively, the whole strategic aspects of it, being motivational, but not being dissociatively motivational. Oh, I know you can do 16 hours.
I like that term, dissociatively motivational.
Yeah.
So you're just saying motivational no matter the situation.
What's that?
Are you saying motivation, being motivational outside of the situation, like irrespective of what's going on, you're always like, yeah, you're awesome, you're going to always do it?
No. I think that's a huge fault.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That takes someone out of being an effective coach and a leader. Huh. If I start with you and you show up and you tell me, I really want to be an Olympic weightlifter. Okay? If I'm telling you right away, Koop, I think this is really possible. Everything I can see about you is right there. And then start trying to train you and motivate you to do that. That's just plain dishonesty.
For anybody who actually who's never seen me before, I will never resemble an Olympic weightlifter.
Yeah.
Never. So what you're saying is they got to be real. Like, that's what I'm trying to get back at is that one of the things that you were pointing out is coaches have to be real with their athletes. They can't always be this, you're amazing, you're awesome, like irrespective of the situation. It has to also be backed up with some honest and at times, maybe difficult dialogue.
Right. The first part of what you were saying, that's dissociative motivation. You're not associated with reality. Do you know the name Tara Knott?
No.
Tara Knott was the first Olympic gold medalist in women's weightlifting. The first time I saw her in the gym, and this is a woman who is 5'0" and 108 pounds. I went over to one of the weightlifting coaches and I said, who's this? And they said, this is a woman that didn't make the 96 Olympic soccer team, had gone to Colorado College, took up weight training as part of the soccer thing, and realized she was quite good. Well, for the coach to immediately see how incredibly fast she was, how just lightning quick reflexes, all of her traits, to be motivational to try and say to her, you're doing well. Really, really looking forward to seeing you in the gym tomorrow and this afternoon. And she made huge improvements over, a period of a couple of years. But she was working with Dragomir Sheraslan, who incredibly knowledgeable, had been an Olympic lifter, was great on motivation. And he could give up all his coaching background and be a motivational speaker, and was appropriately applied. And I'm sure there are other situations where that motivation shouldn't have been that way. So that goes back to, you got me off the idea of feedback. I think for a coach to be able to provide feedback that is objective as much as possible, that you have data that support what you're saying, and that you can allow the athlete to process those data in a way that they understand the relationship between a previous performance and a future performance, or training performance and competitive performances, then I think that quality can be really great.
Here's the stumper for you, JT. Or it might be. I'm assuming it's going to be a stumper for you, because it's a stumper for me.
What weight class should you be as an Olympic lifter?
No way. The skinny, uncoordinated class. Do you remember Meg Stone, who worked with us for a while? She was the one who actually taught me how to do Olympic lifts.
Yeah.
And I remember some of the first sessions that we were doing were all with broomsticks, and which is, I still think is harder to learn with a broomstick as opposed to something with a little bit of weight on it. Yeah. But anyway, that's my own hang up based on my own inadequacies. So I remember after the first couple of weeks of her trying to teach us this with broomsticks, that I just couldn't get it. I couldn't coordinate the movements together, which should be no surprise to anybody who's tried to see me dance. And she finally looked at me and she hit me on my rear end with the broomstick in typical Meg Stone style. She's pretty abrasive and tells you like it is, and says, "Koop, at least you can be an example of what not to do." So if there's ever an Olympic weightlifting competition, consider me out, because I can't even get it with the broomstick. Okay, here's the stumper though, because, and I struggle with this a little bit in coaching, and I know there are a lot of other coaches, including our own coaches, that have a hard time like piecing it together. You mentioned that part of this communication loop has to be based in objective data or objective information that you're getting from the athlete in some form or fashion. You're seeing them work out, you have a heart rate training file, you have a GPS file, power meter file, whatever. You're using that as part of the communication loop to provide athlete feedback. Okay, you're doing good, you're doing great, you're not doing so good, and that becomes part of the mix. When that doesn't exist, which it does from time to time, either with an athlete throughout their entirety of their career where there's not a lot of, objective feedback to get, or during a period of time for whatever happens, how does one go about providing that objective feedback when the data might not exist, or they don't keep track of their training files very good, or anything like that?
Well, a couple of things. One, I think you can always create the data. You don't need any technology whatsoever to create the data. You can use what I've always referred to as marker workouts. You can have selected workouts that a person comes back to and does on a regular basis. And you can have a range of those that assess various, I would say, elements of the physiological performance capability that is going to contribute to whatever the competitive distance that you want to have. So that you can have some that assess power, you can have some that assess speed endurance, you can have some that assess the VO2 max kind of performance, and use those as marker workouts. Because then if somebody's in a situation that they're trying to improve a particular quality, and you can look at how they're doing on those marker workouts and you're getting no change, then you can sit down and you can have with the athlete a conversation. Okay, either we've reached a point, the Germans call it Endcraft, where you've gotten as good as you're going to get and not get any better. No athlete will ever accept that. Or we need to modify the training stimuli that you're using to try and elicit the adaptive response. And, you said I could jump on a soapbox if I wanted to. And I just want to pick up on that one point. I think there are so many athletes and coaches who do not look at their training program, their training regimens from a critical standpoint and say, am I exposing my body to the milieu of stimuli that will cause an adaptation in what I'm trying to change? And you've probably heard me do this, Kearney's 10 laws of the universe. And one of those is you can never learn to fly by running very fast. And the idea is that as you get to a higher and higher level of performance, you have to adapt different approaches to trying to get better. What gets you from A to B and B to C may not, I would say, is not what's going to get you from C to D.
I have heard that. I can tell the audience right now. I can't tell you how many times, and it's part of the reason why, like even things down to like how many athletes I coach, right, kind of emanates from that, because I only have so much time to look at the information that's coming in and give it a hearty qualitative assessment to actually figure out how it all emanates from that kind of stuff. You actually have to look at what's going on to figure out how to get better.
Yep.
And you're right. I don't think a lot of athletes and coaches take the time to give that as thorough of a review and an analysis as they need to do in order to figure out what the next step is.
Endurance athletes, I think, are prone to being very, very poor, very myopic, because for their whole early career, and that's when we lay the groundwork for how we believe we approach a sport. If you just do more, you get better.
Yep.
When Norman Pillsbury and I decided we were going to be 2-mile runners in track season, we ran all the way to the Pennsylvania state border, 2 miles, and back. Well, we did that for a couple of months, and we got better at it.
Go figure. But what a lot of endurance athletes don't understand or underappreciate, I guess, and this is really particular with the ultra marathon audience that is going to be listening out there, is that you can only increase your volume so much. Like eventually you reach a point to where you're going to get injured. You don't have the time. There's some limiting factor there. And that's where the analysis really comes through, because once you're are unable, or the volume increase doesn't result in a positive adaptation for whatever other reason, once that one trick pony is up, where do you go from there?
Yeah. That's coaching.
That's what I've spent the last 20 years of my life trying to figure out. I still don't think I've got good answers for it.
Yeah. Well, there's a model that and it may be appropriate for some of the people that you're working at, that if you take a look at any particular workout, and then you say, all right, from this workout, what are the adaptive stimuli? And we'll put those to the right. What are I'll use destructive stimuli, and we'll put those to the left. And then how do those scales of justice balance out? And when you get to a certain point, let's say you're a sub 27 minute 10K runner. Well, a really good quality workout would be go out and run, repeat miles with 2 minutes rest at 15 seconds below race pace, and do, 6 or 8 of them in a workout. It'd be a great workout. But if you sit down and look at, what are the destructive characteristics of that, from all the orthopedic problems, from all the muscle stress, from, everything involved, that's a huge load. Is it actually going to be counterbalanced with your body adapting to it?
You can have a hard workout and not have it be very beneficial.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I can design for any one of your ultra endurance athletes a workout that does not last 1 hour, that they will not be able to walk away from the next day. We're going to do, I'll do it for you right here.
Okay. That's what I wanted to get out of this, because I got one too. We can go over your example. And we can
okay.
Mine.
We're going to do a set of 60. All right.
60. That's a lot. I can't count that
60
high.
times.
I can't count to 60, JT. So you've already lost me.
In other words, we're going to do it every minute.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
All right. On the minute, we're going to do this. We're going to do 50 full squats and a 100-yard sprint as fast as possible.
Oh.
When we get to the other end of the football field, we're going to do 50 squats and a 100-yard sprint. In 1 hour, you're talking the next day, you're going to have to go scrape this person out of bed.
But that's a bizarre example, right?
Well, I'm working on speed and power.
No, it's true. Okay, fair enough. I mean, I'm sure there's some endurance athletes that would prescribe to something like that. But the one that I use, it might not be as deleterious as that one is, because I agree. If I did that, I'd be in pretty bad shape. But it's more related to, you need to do the things that you actually say that you're going to do. And a lot of trail and ultra running training has been kind of extrapolated, and I would say erroneously extrapolated, from the traditional Olympic sports. So 5K, 10K, marathon, things like that. They look at those as a blueprint and say, okay, we just need to make them more, right? We just need to add more volume to our point earlier. And the workout that I bring out to our coaches is like, listen, you can do a really simple workout, 10 by 1 minute hard, 1 minute easy. And so that'd be analogous to a world-class athlete doing 10 quarters or 10 by 500 meters or something like that, a really common type of setup for a traditional endurance athlete. That workout's going to be hard. They're going to feel fatigued afterwards. It's going to impart some sort of stress on their system. But if you're looking for a cardiovascular adaptation, something that stresses the cardiovascular system maximally, if that's like your goal in your training paradigm, whatever, that's probably not the best workout. And you can peel the workout apart and see why. It's not long enough. The rest is probably too long. The amount of exposure that you have relative to like percentage of VO2 max that you're actually working at is not enough. So if you were doing that workout for like a speed perspective, great. That'd be awesome. But if you're doing it to like maximize your cardiovascular,
I'm not going to let you get away with that.
Oh, go ahead. No, you got to call me out. It's been a long time since you've done that. So go ahead.
If you're trying to develop speed, what is the relative ratio that you need of work to rest ratio?
For an endurance athlete?
What?
For an endurance athlete? Any athlete. So probably if
you're trying to develop speed.
Yep. So probably one part, I'm glad you called me out on this now that I'm thinking about it. Probably 1 part speed to 3 to 5 parts rest. You can't see that, but JT's giving me a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Was that your thumb or your middle finger? I only saw the bottom.
No, that was my thumb. I have big fingers.
Okay. So thanks for calling me out on that. So your 10 by 1 on 1 off wouldn't even be a speed workout. What would it be?
That's sort of a power endurance workout.
Yeah. So anyway, I use that example because it's an easy one to peel apart in terms of like the cardiovascular benefit, which is usually the easiest thing to start to target when we're actually like working with new coaches. It's like, okay, how much of their, what's their VO2 max going to get to on each one of these intervals? Is that enough exposure at that level for that amount of time to produce a certain adaptation? That was my point.
Not a minute.
Not a minute. Yeah, exactly. That's my point, is not a minute.
Yeah.
The coaches that are listening to this, the 10 coaches that we have, the 10 ultramarathon coaches that will be listening to this, they're laughing their asses off because you had to correct me on something. So perfect. I love it.
Typically, if you ask me, okay, a VO2 max protocol would be something like 5 or 6 times 5 minutes on, 2 minutes at jog 50%, with the requirement that the overall work done in each of the 5-minute intervals is equivalent. So that if you're on a treadmill and you're doing, 12 miles an hour, every one of them is right at 12 miles an hour. The first one is easy because you have this extra metabolic compartment that you just use a little bit of, but you've got to do the same stress because the same intensity is what elicits the VO2 max. Even though it's easier, your body is still getting to VO2 max.
I feel like everybody's going to take that workout and do it tomorrow. That would be hard. That would be like an elite level workout. Maybe we do 4 repeats for a normal person like me. I don't know if I could handle 5.
Yeah. You can move it down to 3 or 4 minute pieces. But the thing is, it needs to be the same intensity. Like Nordic Combined used an interval workout like this, and they did it up a canyon out of Steamboat, and the coach went up with a Volkswagen van, and each athlete had their rock along the side of the road. So they all started together, and they used different intervals, but let's say 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, but they had to get to their rock every interval.
That's a similar way that I'll do it with trail runners, is just have them go uphill, but they have to gradually work their way up it because they can't get back down in time. They don't have the Volkswagen van there. They're not that sophisticated.
Well, it's better if you have the Volkswagen van because then you get the rest.
Yeah. Okay. Let's we've divulged into, we've gone down the rabbit hole of like training architecture, which I could do for a long time, but I want to get back to kind of this. You have to be able to analyze what is going on with the athlete and and kind of peel apart, are they adapting? Are they not adapting? Are they more fresh? Are they more fatigued? Communication is a big part of that.
Yep.
Data is a big part of that. How do those two interplay with each other, or how do you think coaches should interplay those two with each other, especially in a high performance context where we have these athletes that are extremely stubborn and have huge high pain tolerances? What's the balance of communication and looking at data?
I would say it has to do with the difference between a technician and an artist. The analogy is fairly similar. All of us can attend classes and can learn how to paint. For some of us, our paintings would end up looking really good on the back of a barn. For some people, they are capable of being incredibly creative, skilled, gifted in that. So that I think of a coach, you can have a coach that's very well technically prepared, but doesn't have the capability to have the insights into the athlete and into how the athlete is responding, and more appropriately, what are the alternative approaches that they can provide for that athlete, whether that happens to be better facilitated recovery, better nutritional support, outside work on sports psychology, better social interactions, the whole myriad of factors that go into that. And some coaches completely have that capability and are wonderful in communicating it. Other coaches either don't take the time, don't have the skill, maybe haven't been exposed to a mentor that could help them understand how to do that.
And that's one of the areas where our internal mentorship structure, I think did a really good job at, because to kind of set the landscape a little bit up for the listeners, we had like an open air office essentially where everybody could hear everybody else's business. And it wasn't that big of a stretch if I said something stupid to my athletes, like, "Oh, I'm going to give you this speed workout that's 10 by 1 minute on, 1 minute off." JT could spin his chair around and say, "Koop, stop being an idiot. That's not why. This is not why," and things like that.
Did Dean actually say that to you?
Dean's like, "Well, I'm going to get Dean on the podcast just completely humiliate me." I had Lindsay, Dean's wife, on the podcast just recently. And so I'm trying to goad him to come in, like, very specifically, just to completely humble and humiliate me at the same time with all the stuff that he has called me on over the course of the years, which has been a lot, and he still does. But the point with that is when you have somebody that is good where you are not, and they can constantly oversee you and hear what you're doing and see what you're doing and spin their chair around and go, "Okay, this, like, you need to think about it like this," because not everybody's great at everything. As you mentioned, some coaches are good at this, some coaches are good at that. Our structure was able to round out those weaknesses in almost a natural way, because we had all these strengths and weaknesses collectively, and we could kind of build off of it. Sometimes it, became more competitive than it needed to, but that's another story. But is that one of my questions for you is that's the way that I kind of grew up coaching, with really good mentors. And it was, I can never communicate how impactful that was to me. You were a big part of that. That's why I'm having you on the podcast. And I've told you that many times, how impactful it has been on me. Is it necessary, though, for coaches to have that? Like, I had that experience where it was a big impact on me. Do you think that is that universal, or is that just something that some people are better able to figure out?
Certainly, my thesis would be there are some people that are way better at figuring it out. Okay, that have the ability to have the bigger picture, see what's happening, and then have their own ego that's enough intact so that they can take different approaches towards trying to get to the same outcome. even if those are changing their own basic philosophy. I think, yes, that there are people that have that capability. But let's use you as a coach that when you and Liz got married, she accepted a position at some high school out in the plains of Colorado, and you became the high school track coach out there. And the next most knowledgeable guy about distance running was the janitor that painted the lines on the track for you. Think of the loss there would have been in your opportunity to develop as a coach, because then you become much more myopic in the inputs become much more limited. Many coaches lack the ability to understand that the key may be in understanding someone else's approach to trying to accomplish the same thing.
Yeah. And to my point, I didn't know that existed until I had to confront it, and it was in front of my face with all of my other peers. Yep. So I was not forced into the situation, but I had to deal with it, right? Versus going and seeking it out, which I think a lot of people, which you can do, you can always go seek out, mentors and peers. Yep. And things like that.
Yeah. I as you know, I'm a woodworker, and I ended up, completely rebuilding this house and cabinets and trim and so on. And there's so many people that will come in and will look at it and be really, really impressed, to be honest. And then they'll say, how long have you been doing it? I said, well, this is not what I've done professionally at all. And then just be really honest. I said, you know what? If you want to know how to do something, you can spend 3 times 15 minutes on YouTube, and you can be pretty well prepared to give it a go. And we don't have YouTube for coaching.
Oh, I love that so much, JT. We don't have YouTube for coaching. I'm going to use that. You mind if I steal that from you?
It's yours.
All right, perfect, man. All right, JT, we're going to let you go. I can't tell you enough how appreciative I've been of your time, of your counsel, of your knowledge, of your expertise, of your mentorship, everything that you have wholeheartedly given to me over the years, and continue to do so, even though we're on opposite sides of the country and have to connect through video. I really hope that that the people listening out there, and especially coaches, can find people like JT Kearney in their lives, because not only have you made an impact on me, you've made an impact on everybody else that I've been able to make an impact on, both coaches and athletes, and they should all be appreciative of that as well.
Well, greatly appreciated. That's wonderful. Now what you have to do is you have to cash that in and show up on the doorstep and, do a few lobsters, a little kayak paddling, go out on a power boat, come up in the winter, and we'll go cross-country skiing.
I'm going to take you up on that. I can never turn an opportunity down to, do whatever adventures that we have, whether it's snowboarding or snowshoeing or talking about physiology.
Yeah, we have lots of toys.
Awesome, man. Well, we'll see. I'll see you in person at some point after this freaking pandemic is over.
2 middle fingers.
Yeah, 2 thumbs. I'm going to show that on the video just so people I can prove that you're not actually flipping me off.
Hey, thank you, Koop.
Yeah, thank you, JT. I appreciate it. Oh man, I really like it whenever I get a chance to sit down with JT. As I mentioned on the onset of the podcast, I've been incredibly appreciative of all the time that he has spent with me over the years, and that one interaction that we had where he was correcting me on something. If everybody at home can envision that happening 5 days a week, sometimes multiple times during the day, and oftentimes with a lot more intensity and competitiveness associated with it, that's probably not appropriate for this podcast. That was my life for several years, and I'm really grateful for that experience, if you can't tell, because it just made me a better person, and it's something that I try to pay forward in my coaching today. So thank you for coming on the podcast today, JT. Thank you to all the listeners out there. I hope you guys had a lot of fun with this. If you have any feedback for me, please hit me up on social media. I love hearing all that. Appreciate the heck out of everybody listening today. And as always, we will see you out on the trails.